Thanks so much, Amelia. I am joining the meeting today from Bunurong land and in Bayside, Melbourne. Look, thanks so much for the opportunity to be able to introduce today's theme. This whole conservation, horticulture, ex situ conservation, the role of living collections in supporting plant conservation outcomes has been something that it's been a focus of mine for like a good many years. Indeed, it's a passion, occasionally bordering on an obsession. So it's actually lovely to be able to join today's meeting and do a quick introduction. I'll probably try and wear a few hats by way of introducing the theme and reflecting a little bit on BGANZ ANPC and the sort of the evolution of conservation horticulture in Botanic Gardens. So first hat I'll pop on is a BGANZ hat. So BGANZ is excuse me, Botanic Gardens of Australia and New Zealand, and it is lovely. I agree, Amelia, that this collaboration between BGANZ and ANPC is it's to be applauded, and it's something that we should be doing potentially a fair bit more of into the future, because both BGANZ and ANPC are very strongly aligned. BGANZ really started in Canberra. It came out of essentially came out of the Council of Heads of Botanic Gardens, where all the major capital city gardens, they wanted to pose the question to the Botanic Gardens community in Australia in the first instance, whether there was any interest in establishing a sort of a national network of Botanic Gardens. And there was a congress held in 2001, where over 100 delegates attended that Congress. The main question that was being asked of the Congress is there an appetite? Is there a need? Would the Botanic Garden Network benefit from establishing the Botanic Garden community benefit from establishing a network of gardens? And the resounding resolution from the meeting was yes. So, under the guidance of Phil Moores, who was Melbourne Gardens, the Royal Botanic Gardens Melbourne director and chief executive, he was the initial chair of BGANZ and wrote up some terms of references. It became really obvious that New Zealand should be incorporated into this network, and there was an inaugural meeting of the group at the Geelong Botanic Gardens in 2002. I just started at the Geelong Botanic Gardens at that point, and found myself on the program committee and almost project managing the Congress. It was an incredibly successful Congress. It attracted 300 delegates from all around the globe. BGANZ was sort of off and running, and me as an individual, just by luck, happened to be sort of right there in the thick of the establishment of this emerging network. The ongoing success of BGANZ, it's really again parallel with the ANPC, is the focus of the organisation in supporting regional botanic gardens and supporting its membership, building capacity within its membership to actually fulfil the roles of a botanic garden. Look, the majority of botanic gardens in Australia and New Zealand are funded by local government. Local councils are concerned with all matters, of things close to our home: building regulations, public health, roads, footpaths, playing parks, fields, rubbish, libraries, local environmental issues, a whole range of community services. And botanic gardens are competing in that space. We recognise that there's a distinction between a botanic garden and a high quality public park. Superficially, you'd look at something like Rona Street in Queensland, or Fitzroy Gardens, or Royal Park, Centennial Park Gardens, and they look similar to botanic gardens, but there's this distinction between a high quality public park and a botanic garden, and that's this curated collections. The distinction being that botanic gardens are about living collections that are curated for specific purposes: how they're acquired, developed, maintained, documented, interpreted, and displayed. There's some real specific aims that sit behind the curated collections of collections in botanic gardens, that the distinction to to local parks. So back to that local government, regional botanic gardens are absolutely funded by local government authorities, but given the amount of competing resources and staffing, community consultation, liaison, resourcing, programming, infrastructure maintenance, but it's really unlikely that if you're a curator at a botanic garden with 1 or 2 staff, that you could go to your parks management, or you could go to your council and look for nuanced technical support around living collections management. And that's where sort of BGANZ comes in terms of building capacity for regional botanic gardens in Australia and New Zealand to be botanic gardens. And that's fulfilled through a whole range of toolkits. There's journals, congresses, regular network meetings, technical working groups. There's a collections working group and an education working group. And we're currently working on a database project that we're looking to roll out to members. So, building that capacity is a really important element of BGANZ as an entity. BGANZ has just changed governance. We've gone from an incorporated business to a company limited by guarantee. And I think the next iteration and evolution of BGANZ is about to happen. I will, if I was clever enough, I'd put a couple of things into the chat, but I'll do this after this. It's Botanic Gardens Month, and there are a host of activities. I'll drop some links into the chat, but particularly there's a thing called Plant Passions, and we're asking folks in the plant world to submit a 30-second video or a minute video on a plant that they that they're keen on, or a plant story, or just a series of plant story videos from people that are into plants. So I'll drop a little note into the chat. With regards to ANPC, there's a link here, because ANPC was also inaugurally formed at the National Botanic Gardens at Canberra. In 1991, ANPC was formed really very strongly as a botanic garden ex situ. It had a very strong ex situ plant conservation focus. And the inaugural congress or conference of the ANPC was entitled Protective Custody, and it was really looking at ex situ plant conservation in Australia, looking at similar objectives to BGANZ, and really this is interesting. This is 1991. It's a good few years ago now. So the initial driver for the ANPC was, coordinating ex situ plant conservation activities. And, the ANPC has had this remarkable evolution from that really, really strong focus on ex situ conservation. And it kind of morphed to more encompassing integrated plant conservation, using a whole range of tools and techniques for conservation outcomes and, on-ground, in situ plant conservation, plant management, translocation, managing threatened processes in the wild. The number of integrated plant conservation disciplines sort of merged from something which was very, very strongly ex situ, and ANPC really diversified, from that ex situ conservation to be much more holistic in terms of conservation outcomes, and using a range of tools and techniques. And that's reflected in the conference themes over the years. So ex situ conservation always has and always will be an absolutely key focus of the ANPC, and that's reflected in this magnificent recent review of the germplasm guidelines, which forms the basis of much of today's content. So ANPC, BGANZ, very complementary organisations, and long may this association continue to thrive. And thanks again for the opportunity for BGANZ and for ANPC to come together.